everyone. I will now pass the floor to the moderator of the day, Rosman Hamzah, the Secretary General of MGA. The floor is now yours, Rosman.
Okay, hi everyone. Okay, so today we are here to have a conversation on gas and renewables, partners in crisis. Okay, first of all, in the blue corner, you have gas, dominated by natural gas. And in the green corner, you will have renewable energy. So first, it comes to our mind, are they competing or are they in fact complementing? Or are they in fact a true partner working together in clean energy transition whilst weathering the energy crisis that we are facing today? As we head towards COP26 in Glasgow, more and more countries have made a net zero commitment. So the latest to join the net zero race is basically Saudi Arabia committing by 2060, Australia committing by 2050, and here in Malaysia, we are committing to go carbon neutral as early as 2050. The International Energy Agency, which is IEA, is just a decade ago where they declared the arrival of the golden age of gas. But this year, they somehow declared that the golden age is over. So according to IEA's net zero scenario, the world no longer needs a new gas fields. Because the current fields, according to them, is already sufficient to meet the declining demand, the declining gas demand well into 2050. Even the Asian Development Bank, or ADB, which is a regional bank that is committed to achieving a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia, has committed not to support any natural gas exploration or drilling activities. I think this is taken from The Economist on the left part, where just last year, where people got excited because despite the pandemic, the growth of renewable was very remarkable and it seems to be unaffected by pandemic. So everybody believes that the green energy will dominate the 21st century. This was in September 2020. But fast forward to now, suddenly we have an energy crisis. So within the same period, the price of energy commodities has drastically increased due to combination of several factors such as unexpected demand, low storage, underinvestment, weather, etc., etc. But I'm sure the panelists will elaborate on this later. So I think you remember just now COP26 in Glasgow, Race to Zero. So as a host of COP26, UK is very keen to show leadership in climate change. So it's just early this month that their Prime Minister made a statement that they can go complete clean energy by 2035. So is it actually achievable? As you can see, over this year, the brown segment here is basically combined cycle gas turbine, which has been dominating the electricity supply in propping up the electricity supply industry. And then if you look on the graph on the right, this is taken in July. At that time, you have sort of a wind drought. That means the wind turbines are not turning in the North Sea. The wind capacity in UK is about 24 gigawatt, but as the wind is shown here in the light blue shade. You can see that in the early weeks of July, the wind is hardly blowing, and that means they need to rely on other fuel or other source of energy, and this is when the CCTV, so combined cycle gas turbine power plant came into to rescue. So if you ask me, this is essentially a good case study on complementing role of gas and renewable. Okay. So the thing is, in our haste to race to zero, we need to ensure that no one is actually left behind. Okay, about 770 million people still lack access to electricity, and about 2.6 billion people do not have access to clean cooking. So there is actually a serious imbalance between the region. The region that is keen to raise to zero seems to be a bit more prosperous compared to the regions who are relying on the growth of energy for their own socio-economic growth. So the question beckons, shouldn't the countries that have their own indigenous gas supply be allowed to exploit new gas fields in order for them to fuel the economic development so that none of their citizens will be left behind? Food for thought. Okay. So we are quite fortunate here today that we have a very esteemed panelists. So it's now time to listen to them. Let me introduce them one by one. So you have Paddy Brewer. He's the Director of Public Affairs at IGU, which is the global voice of gas. So Paddy has 20 years of relevant experience at the nexus of energy and resources, geopolitics, and capital market. He has worked both in consultancies and in-house with sovereign states, NOCs, IOCs, traders, and explorers across the world. Paddy brings the positivity and idealism of the communicator in that he believes that gas can and will be the catalyst for a better world, both today and for decades to come. He also brings pragmatism of an ex-investment banker and counter-insurgency analyst, a UK citizen of British and Irish heritage. He can order meal in English, French, German, and Russian. Very interesting, Paddy. Because for me, I can order fish in those languages like fish, poisson, fish, and riba. Okay, so next we have Marko, who is a partner with BCG Boston Consulting Group in Singapore. Marko is the core member of the Global Energy and Transformation Practices at BCG. He has extensive experience in power generation across optimization, efficiency, and organization transformation programs for electric utilities and energy sector in the Asia Pacific region and Europe. Okay. Next, but definitely not least, you have Azferina, who is the head of strategy for the gas and new energy business in PETRONAS. So Farah has been with PETRONAS for 12 years and has spent her time in areas of merger and acquisition, portfolio, commercial, and business development. She obtained chartered accountancy from ICAEW, was with PwC in London, after getting a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute of New York. It seems that all the clever engineers out there are always electrical people. So today, her job involves facilitating conversations on long-term choices PETRONAS should take to thrive in the energy transition. So as an advocate of gas, Farah believes that gas is a key transitional fuel to achieve the long-term balance in energy mix. She believes that there is no single path towards a carbon neutral world, as not all countries are created equal. So could all the panelists switch on the camera? Yeah, I think that their camera is already on. Let me unshare so that you can see their faces. Okay. Okay. Welcome, lady and gentlemen. Okay. So let's start with the title of the talk itself, Gas and Renewable Partners in Crisis. So are they really partners or are they competing? Let me start with Paddy. What is the perspective from IGU as the global voice of gas? You're on mute, Paddy.
Apologies, guys.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes talking about this and how I think that natural gas has never been as important to global society, but also how I think there is a symbiotic and a positive relationship between the gas value chain, so gas across all its gaseous energy forms, and also the renewable energy sector. Due to its inherent properties, gas is growing in importance. There's energy access, there's socioeconomic development, there's sustainability in the environment. And gas is a major solution to these challenges. and frankly is better than many of the alternatives due to its inherent properties. And so until there is a currently unforeseen energy technological revolution, I believe that the core message has to be gas is good because gas works. If we're concerned about pollution, as we all should be, we have to demonstrate that gas is part of the solution. And that's why I say to almost everyone I speak to, natural gas today and a portfolio of decarbonized gases, including hydrogen and biomethane tomorrow, will be the catalyst for and foundation of a more sustainable energy future. The gas industry, shouldn't see climate change as a challenge, but as an opportunity. Because as dirty fuels become politically or socially too expensive, then gas is primed to be the beneficiary. And climate debate should be seen as a positive driver for natural gas demand. Quick breakaway from my prepared comments here. I've just checked. Natural gas this morning is at 41% of UK power generation. And that's looking outside. The tree in my garden looks like it's in danger of falling over because of the wind, but still over 40% of power generation, and that's just power, that's not all energy, is fired by natural gas. And that is in an economy where there has been significant investment in installed renewable energy capacity. So that comes down to we need battery, if we need battery storage to help enhance renewable energy, the technology isn't there yet, and therefore what we actually need is gas storage. As someone said to me recently in Moscow, the best form of energy storage at the moment is gas storage. This is because I argue there's a fundamental gap between the intertwined policy aspirations for zero carbon energy and total energy access and the engineering and financial reality that we face every day. Gas fills that gap, whether that's through storage or whether that's through provision of energy, and will continue to do so with current and emerging technologies and access to finance. I think something we also need to talk about is gas as a driver of socioeconomic and industrial value across the world, including the developing world. Much of the developing world suffers from significant energy poverty. The IEA has suggested that 1.6 billion people in the developing world, particularly in Asia, have no access to clean cooking facilities. That is 20% of the world's population. Nearly 10% of the population in Central and Southern Asia lack reliable electricity access. This creates a brake on regional socioeconomic development. Looking to the future, there will be more than 2 billion additional people living on the planet by 2050. Much of that growth is coming from the so-called developing world. Now, Europe, North America, and other parts of the world, including Asia, have been benefited from gas's unique properties. And gas is today and will for quite some time remain the foundation of the developing world's energy system. So why should the developing world benefit from industrialization and deny that benefit to the rest of the world? Natural gas also creates socioeconomic value through its inherent public health advantages. Enhanced use of gas today in industrial and domestic environments could drastically cut air pollution and thereby reduce 7 million deaths that is caused by air pollution every year. It would immediately improve the quality of life and public health by cleaning up the air and environment. Again, quick breakaway from my prepared speech. My grands both lived most of their lives in London, and they would tell me about times not that long ago in the 50s and 60s where you did not go outside on certain days because the smog was so toxic. And I can honestly say it is much better that Tate Modern is a modern art gallery on the banks of the Thames than a coal-fired power station as it was. Very quick point about pricing environment and energy security. I believe the current pricing environment is derived from strong and constant demand around the globe for natural gas. Put simply, the world needs more gas to meet the needs of the growing population that wants the highest standard of living, and then you add in the COVID recovery. However, due to the emphasis on environmental policy and energy transition, significant pressure has been put on the supply side of the energy dynamic with no constraints on demand. This has created a tight global market, and because of the inherent nature of gas, it's not liquid like oil, and we can't just open the taps through swaps. You have significantly more volatility through pricing. Add to this the inherently intermittent nature of renewable energy, which meant that suddenly the UK, for instance, needed a hell of a lot more gas in the summer because there was a historic wind drought, and you have a perfect storm. We therefore request policymakers around the world recognise the unique role of natural gas for keeping societies energised and warm, both in developed and developing markets. If this happens, multi-billion-dollar investments can be made that will guarantee global energy security and help loosen that gas market, thereby pleasing everyone apart from the odd short-term equity investor. Just coming back to a comment that Rosman just made, the ADB has decided not to put money into exploration, which is a shame, and unsurprisingly, the IGU, we're not positive about that. But what is absolutely vital is development banks continue to fund infrastructure. If the private sector and other sectors can take on the inherent risk of the exploration and the upstream work, it is absolutely vital that liquidity still puts in the infrastructure necessary, because that is what will provide energy access to all people around the world. Thank you very much for your time. Looking forward to involving in the chat later on.
Okay, basically you probably sum up the whole talk today. Shall we just end and then we talk about the score of 5-0? Somebody lost. Sorry. Okay. Now let's go to Marko. Okay, you've listened to Paddy. He basically lays down his case for gas very succinctly. Coming from the International Gas Union, naturally he says that natural gas is a complementing fuel to renewable energy. You have extensive experience in the power generation from your CV and also electric utilities. So do you see any evidence of partnership or more evidence of competition between renewables and gas?
So first of all, I risk that I will repeat quite a bit what Paddy actually already mentioned. So I'll try to be complimentary and provide a little bit more nuanced view from the utility perspective. And I will speak from the perception of the traditional utilities, so not from the perception of the investors, which are primarily investing in renewables, but more of companies that already own the infrastructure and are thinking what to do with the infrastructure, both in the terms of whether to continue to invest in gas or whether to put all the bets into renewables, or to be a little bit more balanced. So I think it's a notion, especially among the investors, that the gas, actually the same as coal, will be squeezed out by the renewables. And this is in a way true if we take into account a long-term perspective and only the decarbonization aspect. However, basically here we would actually do a big damage to the gas itself by putting it in the same box with coal, because definitely the footprint is not the same. The carbon footprint is not the same, and we would be ignoring two other key elements of the power system, and this is stability of supply and the energy equity. And Paddy actually mentioned very well both of them, because decarbonization of a power system is a journey. So it's not a revolution. It's not something where we will just switch off the conventionals and just all go to the renewables. And this actually also doesn't work in that way. So natural gas is actually a bridge fuel, and it's very likely, I think it's very evident now, that it will outlast coal, it will outlast oil, and it will play a key difference even in the systems which are close to the net zero but not completely decarbonized. Apart from a lower GHG footprint than the coal and oil, gas plants are also proven to be more flexible, which is important for the power system. And actually they can provide the base load if and when you need it. And we know that power systems always need a base load. So when it's raining, when you have an overcast, when the wind is not blowing, like for example in UK now, you have a big need for the source that is not intermittent and that doesn't depend on the nature. Gas also provides additional stability of the system through the inertia of the rotational masses. So for the colleagues which are a little bit deeper into these engineering aspects, you all know that the stability of system is also based on the inertia of the system, and renewables actually can't provide that inertia. at least not with the inverters which are currently in the system. Gas is actually a good solution for that. But of course, there is a lot of ifs, and when we talk about decarbonization, we actually need to take into account that gas is actually not green. So gas leaks in wells and pipelines need to be closely monitored, because any leak will actually lower the GHG benefit of natural gas compared to coal, because we all know that the footprint of the leaking gas and the methane is actually much more polluting than the CO2 itself. When it comes to the predictions, I think that there is a broader consensus in the industry that there is a strong future for the gas. So I don't know, British Petrol, for example, predicted that by 2050, more than 20% of the primary energy will be coming from gas, while 45% from renewables, which is an interesting balance between the gas and renewables. And many others are predicting the similar splits. And what is also interesting, this kind of splits actually hold for the regions with strong gas footprints from the indigenous gas, like for example in Malaysia, where in 2050 the gas, according to some predictions, should be 30 to 40% of the power system, but also the countries which depend on the LNG. And LNG has been proven to be a very important player or the element of gasification as well. And what we see lately is basically LNG, which is being labeled with net zero or responsibly sourced gas, which is basically the gas which is produced with a very low carbon footprint by keeping the methane leaks in wells and pipelines in control, and basically accounting for all the carbon footprint in the course of production of the gas itself and even offsetting it. So this is definitely a sign of partnership or even a friendship, if you can say, between the renewables and the gas, but with a lot of ifs or a lot of conditions. And maybe also a little bit of a time cap, because here we are talking about the future in the next 20 to 30 years, because the future of gas is not completely bright, because by the strict definition, gas is not green. It has a GHG footprint, and in a strict sense, it cannot be part of the net zero power system. However, if you really want to do the last mile decarbonization of the power system, which is quite expensive, then we are prone to use the solutions like carbon capture or the green hydrogen. But it's interesting that in both of these solutions, gas also plays a role, because you can carbon capture the footprint from the gas power plants, and you can also use the hydrogen in the refurbished old gas plants, in which you are actually either starting to blend hydrogen with gas as a transition towards the green hydrogen, or you're actually changing the turbines into the hydrogen turbines and basically reusing the facilities and basically giving them a new youth, I would say, but now in the completely decarbonized hydrogen future. So in a way, I'm actually quite positive about the importance of the gas, but of course, taking into account all the limitations and all the considerations that I have mentioned, and of course, a wise use of the gas in the whole transition story. Rosman, back to you.
Thank you very much. So I'll come back to Paddy on Marko's comments on GHG emission in natural gas, because definitely the industry is working very hard to eliminate any form of GHG emission, especially methane, as Marko rightly pointed out, is more potent than more potent than CO2. It's also nice that Marko says that gas is nimble, that kind of thing, very flexible. I always compare a coal plant and a gas plant. So a coal plant is like an 18-wheeler haulage, where it takes a lot of energy to move, but when it moves, you can't stop it, that kind of thing. Where gas is basically something like an SUV, it will get you very quickly there, and it will get you. It's very flexible, very nimble, that kind of thing. So it depends on what they call it, the electricity grid that you have. then you have to figure out which one is the best for you. Let us come now go to Farah. So you are basically leading a division, a strategy in a division in a business in PETRONAS, which covers both natural gas and renewable. So am I right to assume that you or your organization see gas and renewables as partners?
First of all, thank you once again, Rosman, for having me, and it is a pleasure to be here with the fellow panelists. The benefit of going last is that a lot of the points have been said, but I'll try to complement with some of the perspectives from Asian or Malaysian side of things. So to your question, Rosman, yes, gas and renewables are partners, definitely. And this partnership is much needed because all around the world, what we're trying to balance is between energy security and environmental goals, and both are very important goals. And in fact, what we are seeing today are choices that prioritize energy security because nobody is willing to take a risk on that, especially when what we're seeing today, when the renewable energy is not enough to meet the minimum demand. The wind output out of Europe wasn't enough. The hydropower output out of South Africa and China wasn't enough because of the drought at the back of China economic recovery. So all these, these are drawing supplies of energy into the market, which then created that shortage and drove prices up to at a point of over $30. But in other more price-sensitive parts of the world, these Asian spot prices were too expensive. So we saw the likes of India having to turn away these spot cargoes and were forced to burn coal instead. So it is always that balancing act between wanting to do right by the activists, by a lot of people taking steps towards sustainability, where the results will only show 30 years later, and ultimately keeping the lights on. So gas and renewables is a partnership. It has to be when we take the view that a workable path to sustainability is when decarbonization is carried out at a global level. And it comes with recognizing that not all countries are on equal footing, and not all countries have the breadth of options like most of the developed nations do. And I like to bring focus to Asia specifically. Asia will be left with far less choices when no new coal plants are allowed to be planted up. In Malaysia, coal will be phased out beyond 2026. And these countries do not yet have the luxury of the European markets who have had a head start in renewables. So while the need to decarbonize is clear, the question is still who and how are we going to fund these mass efforts of decarbonization? So, and there's a lot of narrative out there, a lot of reports. The IEA Energy Outlook report was, for one, calling for energy transition to be faster. But at the same time, there's data that we cannot ignore, at least our teams at PETRONAS cannot ignore, that the LNG demand is expected to grow over the next 2 years, almost double in the next 2 years. And if you try to unpack this demand, the biggest importer is still Japan and Korea. And these are high-income nations where affordability is less of a concern compared to the larger part of Asia. These are countries who are championing sustainability. They restarted nuclear, leading hydrogen projects, and have yet reserved space for gas in the name of energy security. And on top of these developed markets, there's emerging markets where LNG is even more crucial, right? Because gas is needed to replace coal and to meet the increasing demand of energy. And we know that renewables is not enough to meet this increasing demand in energy. So the ability to bridge the gap has to be LNG for now. But despite saying all that, none of this suggests that we should slow down energy transition. If anything, we should keep pace, we should speed it up. But until there are flexible options at scale, gas-fired generation remain relevant. They are preferred to balance electricity markets. And I believe, just building upon what Marko said, that the next 2 decades will still be prime time for gas. And a bit at how we look at things in PETRONAS too, gas and renewables are complementing each other, not just about what you do to address the energy trilemma, but how we are balancing our portfolio. So we see these market fundamentals, we read these market fundamentals, and we are positioning ourselves for this high growth potential in both LNG and renewables. And these two need to work in tandem. Our LNG business is the biggest cash generator for PETRONAS. We're going to continue investing there because we want it to continue generating cash for us, which we can plow and invest in the next phase, renewables, so that in the next 10 to 15 days, renewables will become the significant cash generator for PETRONAS. So yes, in short, I do not see a scenario where gas and renewables do not work with each other, Rosman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Farah. It's interesting that you brought up in Malaysia where we have to rely on a very diversified fuel for our electricity. The thing is, in this part of the world, we do not have the advantage that the Europe has, because Europe has an interconnected electricity grid, for example. So a country like Germany, who I think a few years ago managed one or few days to generate electricity 100% renewable. But on the other hand, they also import electricity generated from coal from Poland, and also electricity generated from nuclear in France. Malaysia, in this region, we don't have the Asian power grid, so the Asian power grid is not established, has not reached a maturity. So we really have to rely on our own kind of thing. So I think Farah also touched upon the crisis. I think that we will touch on the crisis next. But before we go to the crisis, can I go back to the methane emission or the GH emission in the gas industry, Paddy? Because I know the IGU is doing a lot of work on this along with the IGU members.
Yeah, interestingly enough, we put out an article about this yesterday on our website. And the first thing we'd say is the IGU has always been at the forefront of trying to take a lead for the gas industry to demonstrate that we do take this very seriously. I think there have been accusations that, excuse me, from various different parties that the gas industry wants to ignore it, and I absolutely wanted to get out and deny that and say, with initiatives like methane guiding principles, with this initiatives like OGMP, the gas industry absolutely takes this seriously. And you can look at this at two levels. You can look at it at the philosophical level that we're talking about now, about how methane emissions are bad because they are damaging greenhouse gas, and that is absolutely true, and that is a very good reason to stop the leakage. As an ex-investment banker, I'd say a better reason is because methane is what we sell, and I can have a win-win situation if we can persuade the gas industry to invest more time and more capital and more energy in monitoring, and then in stopping the leakage. You'll make the money back that you've spent on the monitoring and the engineering work necessary to abate it, because you've got more gas to sell, because it's not leaking out of your pipelines, and therefore it's a win-win. We demonstrate our commitment to the right thing in ensuring that we are as low impact as possible environmentally. At the same time, the commercial players in the value chain make more money. That's why we should take the methane. That's why we do take the methane issue very, very seriously. At the same time, I would suggest that it's worth anyone looking at the basic fundamentals of how much methane is leaked into the atmosphere that is from the natural gas value chain. And I think it's important to understand that we are a part of that issue, and we are doing our best to manage it and deal with it, and will continue to do more. But it would be wrong to point out that the natural gas value chain is anything close to being the single largest emitter of methane in the world, and that there are other man-made sources, human activity sources, which are significantly more dangerous to the environment than the natural gas value chain. So we take it seriously. We want to make this work for our own permission to operate and for our own balance sheet. At the same time, I would suggest to all parties in this dynamic that objective lenses are used when analysing the position of the natural gas value chain around the methane issue. I hope that helped.
Yeah, thanks, Paddy. So definitely, I think because me personally also involved in the IGU activities, and we definitely see seriousness being put into trying to abate methane emission. Like what Paddy says, any fugitive methane coming out is basically a loss of income. So it makes sense. Okay, so to all the audience out there, you can actually ask questions by posting in the meeting chat or in the chat box. Do put your chat there. So if there is any interesting questions that's coming out in the chat box, we will post them to the speakers. The panelists also, if you see any questions that is relevant to you or you would like to answer, by all means, you can volunteer yourself. So let's now shift our focus to the global energy crisis. So I think you can't open the paper today without seeing a global energy crisis, price going up, natural gas price going up. Just now, Farah mentioned that India has to decline spot cargoes because it's too expensive for them, that kind of thing. So let me start with Marko. We know that there are several different factors that actually led to the current energy crisis. So there are actually those who blame the rush deployment of renewable energy to the system. Some calling the renewables as unreliables. So what's your view on this?
Yeah, thanks, Rosman, for the question. I mean, definitely, this is at least for us in the energy sector, probably the topic which is hitting the most the front page of Economist and the New York Times and Guardian and the other newspapers, because this is the one which is very, very visible. And I would say that this is unfortunate outcome of a superficial understanding of the energy transition, because the situation is not as simple as to blame the renewables. And we only now see the full outlines of this global energy crisis. I can call it global because it's appearing on different parts of the world with different reasons. And it actually differs from the previous crisis in a couple of ways. So basically, it actually tackles a whole range of energy sources. So the supply part, which is the coal, the oil, the gas, the electricity, and it's also related to the demand side as well, particularly because of the post-COVID recovery and the jump in the economic activities and in the demand of energy. And then when you put on top of that something which is related to the renewables, but not entirely, and this is the weather-driven demands, you actually have a situation which is happening. So let me try to delayer it actually a bit. So what actually began as several not directly connected regional effects is actually compounding, because when you just take a look at the supply side, basically countries are competing for the same supplies, which is notably gas, including the LNG and the coal. And that's why you basically have a lot of issues in the spiking coal prices, especially here in Asia, and spiking gas prices globally, particularly in the LNG part, because energy system is becoming global and fully interconnected. And when we just check the prices, energy prices lately, and I took some of the numbers as a part of the preparation for this session. So natural gas prices in Henry Hub are about $5 per MMBTU, which is very unusual level since mid 2009 or 10. Brent crude is about $80 per barrel, which is, I think, something what people didn't expect. Coal is hitting 13-year high in Europe. Asian spot LNG is about $34 per MMBTU, and you have some bizarre numbers of the cost of electricity. For example, in UK, which is probably the prime example of the crisis, the UK electricity prices on the spot market have actually surpassed $750 per megawatt hour. While in France, basically France is now implementing, so the regulator is actually jumping in, and it's actually capping the wholesale prices, both on the power and the natural gas. So what are the roots of this whole situation? So when you take a look and when you zoom in into Europe, because a lot of rumors and a lot of information is actually about the situation in Europe, it actually started in last winter, which was colder than the normal winters. And basically what happened is that Europe actually exhausted the stockpiles. And the most affected were countries like for example UK, but a similar situation happened actually in China as well. The other thing is that Europe actually became quite dependent on gas because of the phase out of the nuclear and because of the phase out of coal. Renewables kicked in, but the situation is definitely that the gas imports actually also spiked, particularly the LNG. So in the past 5 years, LNG imports have more than doubled. And when you put into combination that Russia is actually the primary exporter of the gas into Europe, and that there was a shortage of supply, and when you stack it up with cold winter, which is expected, no wind in majority of Europe, so basically it has been particularly bad situation for the countries which rely on the wind, like for example UK. Depleted stockpiles, you have actually in the countries which compete for the same source of fuel, you have spiking prices and you have actually energy crisis. Similar situation have been happening in China, although in China I need to say that the geopolitical situation between China and Australia actually led to the depleted stockpiles of coal, because as you know, because of Australian criticism of China's handling of COVID, China actually stopped importing coal from Australia, which actually left the stockpiles not fully replenished. When we zoom in on Britain and UK, basically Britain is particularly dependent on natural gas, which is not the case with all the countries in EU. So for example, France still uses a lot of nuclear in the base load. Britain has phased out coal for the power generation. It has built a lot of capacity in renewable energy, particularly offshore wind, but this unfortunately didn't kick in because of the weather conditions. So this is in a way the situation which is happening. There are some nuances in different parts of the world. For example, in Brazil, the situation with hydro was particularly bad this year, and hydro didn't kick in. But you will find more or less similar options stacking up. So just to summarize, it's a combination of a supply and demand, rather than only the part which is related to the electricity supply and to the dependence on the renewables. And the solution to this problem is because of that quite complicated, because it requires a collaboration on both sides, so both the suppliers and the market itself. And we can speak a bit later about it, but definitely we can't find the culprit only in the renewables. I think that this also quite emphasized the need for the evolution, so for the energy transition as the evolution rather than the revolution. And all the dormant power plants, so basically all the power plants that have been phased out, could actually be used as baseload currently. But the problem is that even if you can use the power plant, you actually don't have the fuel because the stockpiles are empty. And this is the situation which is happening in China. So China is reactivating the mothballed coal power plants, but unfortunately buying the coal, which is multiple times more expensive than in the normal times. Rosman, back to you.
Just a short question before I let you go, Marko. There is a shortage of coal in the market, we know. What about the position of, do you know the position of Indonesia? Because we hear this flip-flop decision that whether that they say, okay, coal is only being used for Indonesia, and suddenly, yeah, we will export it out. Then suddenly another statement coming out, we're going to use it for Indonesia. So what's the situation there? Can you share?
So basically, Indonesian situation has been a little bit worsened in COVID because, as you know, Indonesia is very coal dependent. And what happened in Indonesia is that in 2000 and 2001, basically you had a pretty large hit of COVID onto the demand, which actually left PLN as the single buyer in Indonesia with a lot of let's say, less utilized resources, which on the other hand had a rippling effect on the upstream part of the value chain and the coal producers, which actually turned off the pipe and actually reduced the amount of coal to be produced. So this is one part which is related to Indonesia. I expect that Indonesian export will definitely continue, and that the demand for Indonesian coal will actually be present in the market. I mean, Malaysia actually imports quite a bit of Indonesian coal, but the problem is that in the mining you can't easily ramp up coal production, and this is the problem in the electricity system, because now when you had this crisis, basically the production of coal couldn't be so easily ramped up. And that's why you had almost like a situation with the last man standing in the coal producers, which could then dictate the prices, because the prices were dictated by the marginal producers, which could actually produce the volume, the extra volume which was needed by China and the other countries.
So that's interesting. Thanks, Marko. There is a question from Fairoz here, which I think Marko has answered very thoroughly just now. His question was, we are seeing prices of commodities increasing across the board. What are the root causes? Because I think Marko have just presented the case. So it's interesting that Marko brought up UK. In my presentation earlier, I showed UK, problem in electricity grid. The thing is, again, because the wind doesn't blow, electricity comes in. Basically, I got that news actually from Paddy, who I think through IGU posted it some time back. He also was saying that there is no solar being. There's no solar power now because of it's been raining heavily. Because of all this issue, the electricity prices to consumers has actually reached the ceiling price, which then put pressures to the retailers. So as let's hear it directly from a person in London. So how's the situation in energy crisis in UK and Europe now?
I think Marko's covered it pretty well, and without going too much into a history lesson about the various different reasons why the UK stopped burning coal, which one could argue is rooted in the politics of the 1980s in the UK as much as any environmental decision, and a remarkable discovery of natural gas which could replace coal that was largely mined by opposition to the Conservative government of the time in the 1980s. We also have in the UK the challenging sort of system of retail energy for consumers is not necessarily connected to any production of primary energy. So that creates significant levels of risk as well to both consumers, but also enhances volatility on pricing, because of the amount of hedging and speculation that goes on in the UK market only acts as a catalyst for greater volatility at times such as this. I think what we've seen in the UK and also to a certain extent across continental Europe is a perfect storm, where in the long term there has been something of a hold on necessary capital investment for making sure that there will always be security of supply because of low pricing and because of concerns over regulatory risk. At the same time, you have greater emphasis on environmental and sustainability policy as opposed to energy security policy. Combine those with the immaturity of renewable energy technology, I think is the best way to put it, in that there has been a remarkable jump in wind power technology in the 20 years I've been doing energy. It's gone from something that was aspiration to something that is now absolutely a core part of the UK's installed power generation capacity. The challenge is the lack of storage, and also whilst the efficiency is fantastic, not everyone can be Denmark, if you see what I mean, with small populations and the best wind in the world. Therefore, we have an issue where gas has on many days this year been at 40% of power generation in the UK because the turbines aren't turning, and we live in a rock on the edge of the northwest Europe. Therefore, solar power is not particularly applicable, as it would be, for instance, in North Africa, where you can have solar all year round. Secondly, as well, you can't have solar in the dark. So it's very much one of those situations where the choice to phase out gas, the political choice to phase out gas, to phase out coal in the 1980s and 90s, meant that we are overly reliant on gas, and the decisions made as well to become overly reliant on imports means that the UK is particularly vulnerable to the fluctuations in global markets. Now, that is been added to by the choice to close UK gas storage facilities and not build new ones. So put all of that stuff together, and the stuff that the basic supply demand stuff that Marko was talking about, post-COVID recovery. This is my first day working from home this week. I've been in London every day this week, and London is getting busy. We can see you can physically see the recovery. There's more demand for power. There's more demand for energy. And obviously worth remembering that gas isn't just about power generation. Gas is about multiple other applications. But if we're just talking power, there is greater demand for natural gas in the UK and across Europe than there is necessarily the ability to immediately supply that demand on the flick of a switch. And that's why I hope that the current higher pricing paradigm, and remember where we were a year ago, historic lows. Why would you invest? Why would you put billions of dollars into the ground and in pipelines when it's at historic lows and no one's predicting it's going to go up? I think what we've seen now is a good investment case for capital investment, so that there will be a more predictable flow of both of liquidity, both of natural gas and energy and capital. And so I think that's where we are on that, Rosman.
Okay, thanks, Paddy. So we've heard what they call it, situation of the crisis in Europe predominantly. What about here in Malaysia? So let's go to Farah. I think most of majority of our audience today is based in Malaysia. If I'm not mistaken, a week or two back, that Dato Sri Mustafa, the Minister in the Prime Minister's Department of Economy, told Parliament that Malaysia is not really impacted by the energy crisis. So, what's your view? Is it impacting, or will the energy crisis come to Malaysia?
Thank you, Rosman. Well, I will agree with Tokpa, but I think the fundamentals suggest that in a way, yes, we are affected because coal is a big part of power generation. And when the coal price surges, because the demand surges, it will translate into our cost of electricity. Except that in Malaysia, it is not the end consumers that feel the pinch. There's a separate mechanism for that. But if this continues, it will impact the country's financials adversely. Right, but next to coal, gas is also a big part of the power generation. But we know that majority of this gas needed to power up, the power plants are met by domestic production, and which is an advantage in terms of energy security, and which shows that the one way to shield against market volatility and price shocks is to make sure that there is sustained supply of domestic production. And it also goes to show that investments in upstream need to continue for as long as possible, and which means we need to incentivize our upstream producers to keep producing, and we need to incentivize them with the right price. And there's lo and behold, this right price is market price. And if we keep making this request, you need to keep producing, but at one point they will not produce at all costs, because no rational investor would produce if the price does not cover their costs and it does not compensate them for the risk that they are taking. So even if we look ahead in the next 10 years, where we know Malaysia, gas will play a bigger role in the power generation, especially with the coal phasing out, all the more the domestic production needs to be sustained. So the shift of gas price to market, or sustaining gas price to market, is even more critical, because we need this indigenous production to keep, to be there for as long as possible. But with all that said, I think it also highlights the need to stay the costs on renewables in Malaysia. We need to find a way to scale it up, and expand the use of batteries somehow, expand the use of whatever form of storage somehow, for renewables to be part of the base load, a bigger part of the base load, and at scale. So there's a lot more stability in the grid, at the same time enough flexibility in the grid. So when Tok Pai is saying it didn't really affect, because people like you and I do not feel it, because there's a special fund mechanism, which I'm not going to discuss here. But if it persists, and if we are exposed to market having to import LNG all the time, we will feel the hit eventually.
So just a continuing question. So do you think that having indigenous gas in Malaysia helps somehow dampen the impact of the energy crisis?
Definitely. I think, and this even though this domestic price is priced at market, we will be, the buyers will be procuring this over long-term contracts, and this is what's going to hedge both buyers and sellers from the shocks that we see today. And is the only reason why buyers are not exposed to the $30 that we see today in the market.
You mentioned just now that you need to maintain upstream investment, basically to ensure the supply security. Here in Malaysia, I think we are quite fortunate that PETRONAS can fund its own investment, and also there is also enough liquidity in the market in Malaysia to basically fund capital, big projects kind of thing. But then we start thinking, there's countries like Sri Lanka who's going to start looking into exploring new gas fields, and we know that Timor-Leste, one of IGU members, are also looking into displacing diesel with gas because it's basically cheaper and cleaner. So with banks like ADB stopping funding to this kind of investment, which is necessary for social development, it would be interesting to see how these countries will then survive. Paddy, I've seen that you already answered a question on green LNG. Would you like to say something about it, or is that?
Sure, I'll expand on it a little bit, but I don't want to talk too much about it, because pretty much what I said in the question is this is very new. Green LNG, carbon through offsets, is very new, and so what I say now might be, if someone looks at this presentation in 3 months' time, as a recording, might be found to be right now, but totally wrong in 3 months. So I don't want to put my head on the block like that. But what I will say is, our colleagues at the Organisation of Liquefied Natural Gas Exporting Countries, GIGNL, have done some fantastic work on this, on looking at where the situation is now, how various different offsetting programs work. And I think at the moment we are very much in the situation that no cargo is the same. If you see what I mean, we are, if not quite in single figures, then we're not in hundreds of cargoes yet of green LNG, and therefore it would be wrong to generalize. We're at the nascent period of the green LNG industry. I think, however, what is very apparent is the demand is there from the buyers. The producers wouldn't be doing it for the good of their souls. They are doing it because the demand is there from the buyers, and obviously, as a comms guy, I can see the benefits. But the reality is it's complex. It's complex. It demands investment. But if the buyers are asking for it, and more buyers are asking for it, we will see growth in this. And I believe we are seeing significant growth at the moment. But as at the start of any new, what is essentially a financial product, this is essentially a new. One could argue this is like the birth of a new financially traded derivative. there are the market is searching for standardization, and it isn't there yet. And I think that's it's something to watch with interest and something to engage. All parties should engage with. And what I think is absolutely vital is that this is done for the best of reasons. I think the danger for the industry, and I call this out to our members as well, is do not take the risk of greenwashing on this. This is the sort of product that must be done right. Otherwise, you hand the advantage to our detractors. But as I say, it's new stuff, and I don't want to go into the specifics because what is correct today will be wrong tomorrow. So I think it's worth just saying, engage with the Gignall report because it's good stuff, and we're going to see a lot more of this because it meets the needs of suppliers, it meets the needs of buyers, and it is, when it comes down to it, it is good for the world as well. So hopefully we're seeing the birth of a win-win situation.
Okay, I think it's still quite new in the market, the green LNG or carbon, they call it carbon neutral LNG. I think which is more, a more precise term, offsetting carbon. Okay, basically at this moment now, the finance minister is tabling our 2022 budget in the parliament. At this very moment, it's just started. I think the suitcase was really open. The famous suitcase containing the budget, which is being used by every minister of finance, is open now. Is being tabled. So I hope the audience are still with us. I know some of them will be having two screens in front of them. Watching both the budget and our thing. So in conjunction with the budget, I'll go to the question here by Megat Zariman. His question is, a few countries have started imposing carbon tax. What are your thoughts on this carbon tax implementation? So maybe Marko, you want to have say your Singapore has done it, we know. They also plan to increase it. So can we probably you share some experience that you have?
Yeah, let me just do a bit of a step back. So the penetration of renewables and the growth of renewables heavily depends on the policies, because as you know, in some of the markets, renewables are still not at the parity with conventionals, especially not with coal. So you, in a way, need policy mechanisms in order to stimulate them. And there are many policy mechanisms. I also see one of the questions which is related to it, through the feed-in tariffs, through the auctions, through the phase-out, deliberate phase-out of some of the technologies, like, for example, coal, which is now happening in the Philippines. And then one of them is actually the carbon tax. So when it comes to any kind of policy mechanisms always have the upsides and downsides. So the upsides are definitely that they can stimulate the technology which doesn't have a commercial viability or economic viability, because you want to ensure a certain infrastructure. And one of the good examples of that is actually Vietnam, which actually through the feed-in tariffs did a lot of is actually a front runner in the renewables in the region. However, policies also have a downside, and this is that you can heavily disbalance the market. And Vietnam is also the example of a downside, because they so disbalance the renewable mix in the total mix that currently the grid can't sustain the renewables. You have a lot of curtailment, so basically the grid can't absorb the energy. Investors are dissatisfied. And on the other hand, you have a lot of installations, like, for example, solar rooftops, which are being heavily supported, but just because the feed-in tariffs have not been properly adjusted. So in this whole context, the carbon tax is definitely something which is welcomed in order to phase out the conventionals and to basically, in a way, add additional cost on the conventionals. And this is currently happening in Europe. So basically, you have a carbon tax which is even higher than 100 euros per megawatt hour for some of the for some of the countries. which is completely demotivating any kind of a continuation in technology. Here in Southeast Asia, there was a lot of talk about introduction of the carbon tax. Even Indonesia was talking about the introduction of the carbon tax in order to phase out the certain technologies. However, I mean, it is a good idea notionally, but this is the idea which can actually affect the energy equity quite a bit. And if you take into account the energy equity in Southeast Asia is very important, because we are not the countries which are leading the pack, like Western Europe or the States, in terms of the economic parity. I would say that any kind of disbalance in the systems where you have most of coal and gas as a source of energy, introduction of the carbon tax can actually has a risk of spilling over into the retail prices and into the industrial prices, into the industrial cost. So I would say yes, in order to deter the investors and basically to channel the investors into renewables, yes, but we need to be careful how this actually impacts the prices themselves and who is bearing that cost. Is this cost actually carbon tax actually reducing the margins of the producers, or you will see the spillover into the tariffs? Because some of the countries like for example Indonesia, which have extremely low tariffs, basically PLN is on the bleeding edge of the profitability, and basically introduction of the carbon tax would definitely be something what might have an impact on the prices. In Malaysia, situation is not so bleak, but definitely the carbon tax could reduce heavily the margins of the producers, which are then not stimulated anymore to do this kind of activity, which can also disbalance the system. So, as said, carbon tax, yes, but with a very phased introduction and with a very carefully estimated impact on the system.
There's a comment here from Muhammad Shukri saying that Indonesia is heavily subsidizing PLN. Okay, I just want to pick up on, you said that Vietnam grid is not ready to take up all this renewable because they're quite actually quite bullish in terms of solar and also wind. So how much does it, what does it take to bring the grid to be renewable ready? Because we have you talk about distributed generation, you talk about prosumers, that kind of thing. So what does it take to get a grid like Vietnam ready to be able to accommodate all these different types of generation?
So maybe if I can start. Renewables have one trait which is not the same as the conventionals, and this is that you're typically installing renewables in the areas which are favorable. Like, for example, you have a wind or you have a larger solar irradiation. In Vietnam, most of the users, industrial users, are actually in the north, which is not so favorable when it comes to the wind and solar, and that's why a lot of capacity is actually in the south. So you can imagine this is almost like having all the people on vacation in the south and then commuting to the north using one road. So this is one problem of the grid, the pure transmission capacity, which is the basic problem of the grid.
Okay, so it's something like a Singapore holiday, everybody goes through the causeway, is it?
It's like a causeway almost. So And definitely the other problem, Rosman, is the fact of the distributed nature of the renewables, because the capacity of the renewables, even the large-scale renewables, is only the fraction of the power plants. I mean, Jana Manjung itself has 5 gigawatts and more of installed capacity, while the largest installation of solar have about 2 gigawatts, but peak capacity. So it's a different size. And then when you put on top very distributed, in the true sense of distributed nature, like solar rooftops, and then the EV charging itself, you actually get the problem of distribution grid. So basically distribution network itself, which is typically not developed. So you actually need to develop much more branches from the main transmission capacity. And the second one, you need to strengthen the transformers. because the transformers themselves are typically not equipped for the bidirectional flow of energy. This is one, and the second one for the increased flow of energy. So, for example, now I'm trying to lobby for the one EV charger to be installed here, and we actually depend on the transformer which can't support that EV charger, where the local utility here needs to do the upgrade. So you can imagine the problem of the grid when this starts to happen massively across the country. So Vietnam is actually planning, EVN is planning to invest something like $30 billion into the strengthening of the grid. So both the transmission capacity, both the transformers, and basically enable the better use of renewables. There is the third thing which is important, which is the element of the smart meters, which is introducing the intelligence in a way which is then measuring the bidirectional flows, and which enables you the pay-per-use and also net metering, which is important for any kind of prosumers in order to make their business case better. So definitely quite a bit of investments, which often utilities are either not fully ready to make or not prepared to make, and where utilities actually heavily depend on the source of financing, because governments are not very keen to put all of this as a part of the regulated asset base and to transfer to the consumers. Because you can ask yourself, why would you pay to the utility for your neighbor's car to be charged? Because utility needs to strengthen the infrastructure. So it's a lot of questions which are still not fully resolved.
It is interesting because Malaysia will go into the next, for the electricity tariff, will go to the next regulatory period, 2022 and 2025. So it will be interesting to see whatever that you say just now, whether they will put sufficient investment to consider the influx of solar, because now we have quite a number of solar after a few rounds of the large-scale solar. So next, I will try to pick up what you call it, a question from the chat. I'll give the longest question. This is probably the longest question from Aimi Nadira from PEGT. So if it's coming from PEGT, I wonder if it's planted question by Farah. Never mind, I'll just read it. With China being one of the biggest coal importers and at the same time biggest coal producer, they have hugely impacted coal prices as we speak, and especially with the current supply crunch that we are seeing now. Looking ahead with China phasing out coal post-2025 towards achieving their carbon emission target, how do you think they will change the energy landscape in Asia, especially Malaysia, and how this impact gas being sort of competing or fuel in power sector? Farah?
So with China in mind, if coal is being phased out, I think the gas is the winner, and that is also the data that we see. That is one of the drivers that support why LNG demand is growing, despite the call for going green, sustainability by 2050 and all that. So that is one of the important fundamental. And in China, I believe the other renewable power for them is hydro, which we know is not as efficient or does not have a high enough capacity rate as much as gas-fired generation. So again, I think that's one of the other things that drives why gas would become more prominent in China. And lastly, yes, they are aggressive in renewables too. But I think this goes back to the debate between renewables and gas, the question of reliability, higher capacity factor. I think gas will still, become prominent in China, which works well for LNG sellers like us. We know that China is going to, perhaps match Japan or Korea as one of the importers. So I think these are the fundamentals I believe will happen.
So, okay, basically it's just this weekend that COP26 will start. where if you look ahead of the COP26 that I mentioned just now, more countries are already revising the 2030 targets under the Paris Agreement, and some even committing to the net zero emission. So, so basically, in the IEA's zero pathway that I presented just now, renewable and low carbon gases such as biogas, hydrogen, and natural gas with CCUS will see a significant increase. But in some pathway, the some pathway forecast like IEA and the ADB document just now says that we should not explore new gas fields. So Farah, I'm going to put you on the spot now. Okay, what will happen to Malaysia's energy security if today we stop investment in upstream gas fields?
Okay, we can discuss that hypothetically, Rosman. Because if that happens, I think the situation will be very grim for the country financially. Yeah, I mean, if we play it out, if we stop upstream production, the domestic gas supply runway will be shortened and eventually stop, and we don't want that. And not only is that a risk to energy security, that's curtailing revenue generation for the country. And we know that natural gas industry has been one of the biggest and economic contributor. It's contributed over hundreds of billions to the GDP, supported tens of thousands, close to 100,000 of jobs. So it is really the multiplier effect that we like and we like to sustain, at least for Malaysia. But practically speaking, given the abundance of globally traded LNG, if we didn't have our own gas, we'd be importing this gas. And we would know enough to secure them via long-term contracts. We wouldn't want to be, subject to all these volatilities, and that would probably mean more RGT investments, I suppose, more than the ones that we have. But the thing is, when Malaysia does that, when all sectors import LNG, that means all sectors are buying gas at market price, which is good. There's an acknowledgement of that. But we are compensating other gas producers instead of compensating our local producers and the upstream producers in our country. When we know there is still some runway left in our resources, it's not infinite. It's there, but it's limited, but it's still there. And this is exactly why market liberalization is in place. And I think Paddy talked about some parts of the world. This is still, a nascent phase. True for Malaysia, we're just starting, and it's important to create that and sustain that, sustainable gas industry, because we need the security of gas of supply. And I also talked about it earlier. As we foresee gas being a bigger part of the generation mix, we need to incentivize our upstream. We need to compensate them with market-based pricing. So hypothetically speaking, we would be walking away with from a lot of economic benefits. Rosman, is the multiplier effect that we want to sustain. I think there's been some, rule of thumb. For every $10 we spend upstream, there's always that 2 to 3 times more value you create over the value chain. So that is what we will effectively be walking away from if we stop gas.
Okay, and that is also give employment to the Secretary General of Malaysian Gas Association.
And I will run out of job, perhaps.
Okay. Before I go to Paddy, you raised your hand just now. It's interesting enough to see that Malaysia is. We were quite fortunate. We have our own indigenous gas. Basically, in the 1990s, gas is basically single-handedly provided the energy source, both in terms of directly to the factories for indirect energy, and also in terms of the electricity produced. Because I came into the energy sector during the phase of the IPP. It was UK started first with the IPP. Malaysia was probably second in the world to copy the IPP. There was there was a total blackout in Malaysia. So what we need to basically put in quick power into the system, and the fastest power that can come online is essentially a gas power plant during that time. So, and because of the phase construction, you can first do a gas turbine power plant, get it running while you are working with the combined cycle power plant. So when the steam turbine is ready, then you come in. So with the phase construction, basically show the flexibility of it. So you put your hand up just now, Paddy. Anything that you want to?
Yeah. I wanted to build on what Farina said. It's funny. It's going back to something I mentioned a little while ago. In the coal used to be a dominant industry in the UK. It employed thousands of people, and it it almost closed down. It was in a long phase close down. But the close down, for various different reasons, was managed really, really badly. And I think the world needs to learn from how badly the UK phase out of coal was, because there are still significant levels of unemployment and poverty where coal used to be produced in the UK, because there was no thought to what next. And I think that was because the decision was, as I mentioned previously, very much party political, as opposed to significant engineering and economic planning. And I think that the value of gas production, the value of upstream, the value of indigenous supply needs to be very seriously considered outside of purely environmental and sustainability concerns. It is undoubted that the world needs to use less carbon. It is also undoubted that people of today deserve the same consideration as future generations. And very, very difficult decisions have to be made. But it strikes me that something I said earlier, and I'd like to restate it. I believe that there is, excuse me, a fundamental gap between the policy aspiration that focuses on environmental and sustainability targets and the engineering and financial reality of today. And this comes back to carbon taxing. There is a prudent level of carbon taxing that incentivizes enhanced use of renewable energy. At IGU, we tend to feel a little bit concerned about carbon tax being a blunt instrument, but I'm prepared to say that if it is sensibly, intelligently, sophisticated design policy, it can absolutely be the correct thing. At the same time, at the moment, if we recognize that gap between policy aspiration and industrial reality, you are more likely to make the most of indigenous resources in the most sustainable way, and also not just on a sustainability, not just on an energy basis, but on a wider socioeconomic basis. So, for instance, the reason that Germany still uses filthy, disgusting lignite in its power generation is for socioeconomic reasons, because the mines are in politically contentious parts of Germany, and there are few other options for not just the miners, but the women that work in the cafes, the places where the miners go to have their clothes laundered to get rid of all the dirt. The entire socioeconomic ecosystem of that part of Germany is based around lignite mining. Same in Poland. And I think that's what needs to be considered when we're talking about should we use indigenous gas resources, is the broader socioeconomic value that is an inherent positive of ongoing investment in this case, Malaysian upstream. But you mentioned Timor, you mentioned Sri Lanka. Frankly, it could be anywhere, as long as the upstream operations are done to the highest possible standards of sustainability for the next number of years, arguably decades. Natural gas is the gap filler between aspiration and engineering reality, and then enhanced technologies make it cleaner as well. So the whole point about the IGU saying is, yes, obviously the vast majority of what we talk about is natural gas, because that is the vast majority of what is produced. But in the future, you can't have a hydrogen economy that's based purely on green hydrogen because of renewable energy generation capacity. Therefore, you've got to look at blue hydrogen options. You look at CCUS, you look at multiple other technology options. That means that the subsurface in Malaysia will retain its value for longer because of the effective application of technology on it, which means that the socioeconomic value for Malaysians will be retained. And as long as I think the broader perspective can be seen and understood, when considering policy, I think that gas retains its place because, as we've seen over the last few months, the demand is still there, and if the dollars aren't put into the ground, what environmental policy is doing is it is not alleviating poverty; it is cementing poverty. And I think that is something that we need to be very aware. I think that's something we need to be very aware of all around the world. And I say this as someone who just told his wife not to turn the heating up and to put another jumper on. This isn't the European lecturing the world. This is a challenge we all share. I'm working from home in my shed. I don't have heating in here because I can't afford it. So it is very much one of those situations we need to be aware of. It's not just about the environment. It is about broader socio-economic value creation across the economy, and I think that always needs to be considered.
Okay, it's interesting you brought the broader economic impact, because there was a study done, I believe, last year by an IDEAS, an Institute of Democratic or something. So when they did a study on the socio-economic impact of the natural gas industry to Malaysia, and if they consider what you considered just now, taking everything in, all the income in, the spillover effect, that kind of thing, the natural gas industry in Malaysia actually brings in 135 billion ringgit annually. And then this wider economy itself employs more than 80,000 people. So it is a big spill effect. It's not if it's not considered that gas generates electricity and the electricity is generated from that, so if you count that, you count all the factories that is being built or that operates from the electricity from gas, then the spillover effect is much greater than that. Okay. Unfortunately, it feels we just started a few minutes ago, but we are now at 4:30. So the thing is, there's a bunch of students waiting to see whether they are the videos that they submitted for a competition, whether they won it or not in the competition. So we have to give way to them. So let's do one round of concluding. Do you have any concluding thoughts? Let's start by the lady this time, Farah.
I'd like to take the opportunity to pick up a question which I saw. How do we continue to balance LNG and renewables for PETRONAS? With renewables, we're not as strong as in renewables like we are in LNG, so we need focus. So I think the way we are going to operate ourselves going forward, focus on the markets, focus on the technologies, and understand how they are different from how we evaluate typical LNG projects. So I understand the need to shift the way we evaluate projects, the way we look for projects, and how we run that business. But we also need to recognize LNG needs to keep running. We recognize our strengths, maintain our assets, keep sweating value from there, because we need funds from here to grow our renewables portfolio, to make that more significant in our portfolio. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Marko?
So I will build on one point that Paddy rightfully so mentioned, and this is the energy trilemma, and basically the role of the power and the broader energy system in not only decarbonization goals, because energy system is one of the main culprits of the carbon footprint, but also in the whole socio-economic stability. I'm coming from Eastern Europe, which, like UK, depends heavily on coal, independent heavily on coal, and where the whole coal phase out has been a huge economic problem, a huge social problem, which actually destroyed many of the areas of Eastern Europe. And that's why decarbonization needs to be done very, very carefully. I think that the whole story about renewables is much more than the energy sector. It's also manufacturing. Malaysia is one of the great examples of manufacturing of renewables as well, which is a big job creator. And then the whole value chain, which is next to the renewables, like the inverters, like the electronics, which is very, very important. And then on the other hand, the whole question on the price stability. And I mean, just to summarize, gas is definitely playing a critical role here as something which is almost the best of both worlds. So basically, it's a step forward when it comes to the decarbonization. Is definitely something which is providing the stability and which is very complementary to the renewables. And if you are not obsessed with complete net zero and the last mile decarbonization of the power sector, because if you are blessed like Malaysia that you have a lot of forests and the carbon sinks which can offset that, then you are having almost a perfect situation in which you are retaining a very small baseload of a stable gas, and basically betting your future on the renewables, but not only on the renewables. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I got distracted because the secretary gave me instructions. It made me lost track of what I think. So basically, you mentioned just Malaysia had carbon sink. I think we have more than 50% in terms of cover of carbon sink of the thing. Can I go now to Paddy? Any what you call it?
I'd just like to finish with one thing that we haven't mentioned that much. Excuse me, is this gas's inherent flexibility outside of pure power. It clearly has significant advantages through CCGT, but I think also the world needs to see that gas is more than just power generation. Obviously, it's in my part of the world, it's heat, but then there is the broader industrial diversification and value that is created through the natural gas value chain and will be continued through into hydrogen, through into clean gases. And I think that really is why we've come up with this slogan, this idea that gas works, because it is abundant, it is flexible, it is cleaner than coal and cleaner than oil. And I think that we need to be part of the equation and we need to keep talking. That's why I'm so delighted to be here. And I think there are certain parts of the world that are extremely lucky. And Malaysia is one of them, because you have abundant natural gas in subsurface, you have outstanding operators like PETRONAS, and you have the natural carbon sinks of the forest as well. So would that the UK shared such advantages that Malaysia has with that situation, and let's keep talking, let's keep seeing where it goes, and good luck to the students with their videos.
Okay, so it's interesting that you brought that gas is not only supplying to power, because Malaysia is probably the largest surgical or medical glove supplier in the world, and glove is also a major consumer of gas. So if we don't have gas, or if the gas supply from PETRONAS was interrupted during the pandemic, then the whole world will have issues, handling the pandemic, because there will be a shortage of surgical gloves. So this was during that time where Malaysia relied on gas to produce glove, both by supplying directly to the glove manufacturers, also through the power supply. Because during that time, you also have challenges of getting coal imports because of the restriction of movement, that kind of thing. And also, it's interesting that Marko says that Malaysia is one of the largest manufacturer of renewable technology. I think I do not know what we are. We used to be number 2 or number 3 in terms of solar manufacturer in the world. It's interesting enough because one of the largest solar panel manufacturing plant in Malaysia is located up north in Kulim High Tech, and the power supplied to the Kulim High Tech is coming from gas turbine. So gas is basically manufacturing solar panels for the whole world So thank you very much. I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we don't. Thank you, Azferina, Anuar. Thank you, Marko Lackovic. Thank you, Paddy Blower, for waking up. What time is it now? 7 o'clock? 6 o'clock? Or...
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. It's 9:30. It's 9:30 now. I'm good. Good to go. That's all good.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much. Thank you all for the audience for putting up with us and then for not switching to the other channel. But don't go because after this, I will hand over to Sarah, who will then start the proceeding on the what do you call it on the video competition. So thank you, Farah, thank you, Marko, and thank you, Paddy. Really appreciate your time today, and it was very interesting discussion. We wish we have more time. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Rosman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, guys.